We're going to begin now. And so welcome to the series of webinars on innovations at high-performing charter schools in Illinois. The series is made possible through an ISB contract with Measurement Incorporated and the Senseo Group. I'm Sarah Silver from Measurement Incorporated, and my colleague Tanya Yarosevich is from Senseo. Tanya, please wave. On our support team is Christina Limson-Harvey from Measurement Incorporated, who will be our technical troubleshooter for the day. Please wave, Christina. Thank you. And you can chat to her if you are having technical issues. Now, today's presentation is about learning how to write, a skill that we all know is critically important, not only through a student's educational life, but throughout his or her future. And we're going to hear from our presenters as to how to foster this skill in a high-performing school and what success they have achieved. Now, this webinar is being recorded and will be archived in the Best Practices corner of the Charter Schools page of the ISB website. We're keeping all attendees muted till it's time to participate. And at that time, you can unmute yourself. And if you have a question, ask it or use the raise hand function that appears in the reactions box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also drop in questions into the chat box as you think of them. So I'm hoping that you have by this time received all the materials that came with your registration and that you have them ready. In any event, we will push them out in the chat box at the time that you will need them during the webinar. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. Sherry and Megan, please take it away.
Good afternoon and welcome to Writing Your Future, a Toolbox for Success. This will be a 90-minute webinar. And you will receive PD hours for participating in this today. Please, I would ask you to write down any questions that you may have, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So let's get started. My name is Sherry Gruzius, and I am the Department Chair of the Humanities at Southland College Prep Charter High School. I teach senior English, and I teach a trial advocacy class, and I coach the mock trial team. I was an attorney in another life, and I'm able to use my skills with that class. For this particular webinar, it's an offshoot of a grant that we created, and I'm going to go into detail in a minute. I was the overseer and administrator in charge of the grant. And once again, we'll describe that in a little bit later. Megan?
Hello, my name is Megan Michaels, and I am also a teacher at Southland. I primarily teach AP English, although I do teach 9th grade English as well. I also serve on our 9th grade On Track program as a coordinator. I coordinate our mentors. I'm a district instructional coach. I sponsor yoga club, and I also sponsor Teens Helping Teens. And so my role in this grant was as an instructional coach within the district, and I worked directly with the teachers and the administrators in regards to writing instruction.
Before we begin, we'd like to look at the goals of the webinar and highlight the Illinois state standards. Megan?
So in this webinar, teachers and administrators will learn how to effectively use the following in order to improve student writing outcomes. So we are going to use annotation organizers. We're going to use templates. So you have copies of these already in the materials packet that was sent to you. So the first sample is a student sample template, and this is for writing a paragraph. The second sample is a little bit more sophisticated, and those are for you to use after the webinar, absolutely. And then we're also going to use the 6 traits rubric. So I do want to go over those with you in case you are not familiar with the 6 traits rubrics. So the 6 traits rubrics, when we're looking at the scoring guide, right, you can get a score between a 1 and a 6, 6 being exceptional, 1 being a struggling writer or needing improvement. And so we go through and we look at ideas. So the central message and details that support the message. So those are all the ideas. You can certainly read the rubric in detail. The second is organization. So the thread of logic, the pattern of meaning, how we organize the piece. The next trait is voice. And this is the tone of the piece, often achieved through word choice. We also have then word choice. So the vocabulary that the writer uses to convey meaning and enlighten the reader. Sentence fluency, so the way words and phrases flow through the piece. And of course, conventions, and conventions are mechanics in our grammar. And then there is a +1 trait, which is presentation. So then there's also a scoring guide for scoring presentations. But we're just going to talk about the writing traits today.
And these are the Illinois state standards that we'll be using for the webinar. We want to give you a snapshot of our school community and also the English department. We are a lottery-based charter with exemplary status. We have an extensive 9th grade on-track program that Megan Michaels and I developed. And last year, we had a 97.9% on-track rate. 45% of our students are of low income, 9% have IEPs, and 19.6% of our students are enrolled in one or more APs. I want to specifically look at our English APs that we offer at Southland. Ms. Michaels teaches both of these classes. AP Lit and Lang. So the first one we're going to look at is AP Lang. 16 juniors took the exam, and of the 16, 81.3% scored a 3 or higher. This is compared to the state average of 66.8% and globally 62.2%. AP Lit, 15 seniors took the exam. 73.3% scored a 3 or higher. And once again, compared to the state average of 60.5 and globally 60.9. Megan has had the highest AP scores in our school for 7 years running. And quite frankly, we are lucky to have her.
Thank you.
Just to describe a little bit of what the 2-year grant involved. Because this webinar is an offshoot of that. It was a 2-year grant. The two of us wrote it, submitted it, and we were awarded. It was called Writing Your Future. And we actually extended it for a year because one of our schools that we focused on did not show growth. So Megan pushed into that school for a 3rd year and coached and mentored the teachers there. So we say it's a 2-year plus a booster year for the grant. And Megan will talk about that in a minute. Southland is part of District 162, which is a pre-K through 8th grade district. And many of our students come from these feeder schools to Southland. In our writing grant, it was our hope to implement a cohesive writing program, which started at grades 3 and extended all the way through grades 12 at Southland. We used for the program the 6+1 traits rubric, universal templates, in-depth professional development for both teachers and administrators, the use of a traveling portfolio and traits tracking from grade level to grade level, and developed a writing manual for vertical alignment, common language, and common rubrics and tools. One of our favorite sayings during this whole process, and we made many presentations, was that it was our goal to have administrators, teachers, students, and parents all looking through the same pair of glasses and speaking the same 6 traits language. So now I'm going to hand it over to Megan who was our teacher coach and actually rolled the program out to the teachers, the students, for the actual grant roll-up. Megan?
Thank you. So we've had some success with the grants. So after 2 years of the writing professional development and the coaching, 4 out of 5 of the participating elementary and middle schools showed growth on the end of the year state test. We have a couple testimonies here from students. Both students are mine, and they're going to talk about their experience with writing and revising and really going through the whole 6 Traits Writers Workshop process. So the first student testimony is from Dorian Davis. He's one of my current students. He is a 9th grader enrolled in general English here at Southland College Prep. So I will share Dorian's expertise with you.
All right. Well, hello, Dorian. How are you today?
Hey, I'm good.
Good. So please tell me about the research paper that you wrote the first semester. What was your topic?
So, first semester, I had wrote my research paper on bullying. See, a lot of people don't realize that bullying is actually a very serious condition, and it could lead to depression, and it could lead to people wanting to kill themselves. See, in my research paper, I talked about a person named Seven Charles. He was a little boy going to school, and he was consistently getting bullied, and nobody really realized that it was that bad until he just killed himself. His family, his parents, and everyone around him was very hurt. So a lot of people don't realize bullying is very serious.
Thank you. And so can you tell me a little bit about the process for writing the paper? So how did you go about writing the paper? What was your process?
So first, I had to figure out what I was going to write about because I didn't really know at first. And so after that, Miss Michaels, my teacher, she had us going through a lot of good steps. She said we did an outline where when we found out who we were going to write about and what our topic was, we had little note cards, electronic note cards. And we wrote where we got our information from and all about the story. And we did 3 different types of stories. So my 3 stories was Seven Charles, Rayshard Brooks, and then police and protesting. But it was a lot of things that we also had to do because I was messing up at first because I didn't really write a research paper. I had never really wrote a big research paper like I did today. And I had to make a lot of revisions. And yeah, that's what we did.
And so how many revisions do you think that you ended up making to your research paper?
So when I first started, it was all messed up. I probably had to make 100 revisions because the words, my grammar wasn't right, but I had Miss Michaels guiding me through it all. And she really was a lot of help because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know where I was at. I didn't know if it sounded right. So for all the different things, she was having me highlight different words, making sure that everything flowed correctly and making sure it looked right. And so I would say I did have to make a lot of revisions during the paper.
Good. And how do you think your writing changed as a result of using this writer's workshop format? So having to go through all the revisions and make all of the changes and go through the steps from the note cards to the outline to actually writing the paper. How do you think your writing in general changed?
I think I improved a lot. I think I improved a lot because before I was used to a paragraph being 5 sentences. But then I started to realize as I started to make revisions, after I started to change my writing, that it was more 8, 9, 10 sentences was one paragraph. And so as I started to change my writing up, I started to realize that I started using bigger words. My vocabulary started to expand a lot because I was used to plain little sentences like oh, okay, that was a good day, or how are you doing? I wasn't used to bigger and brighter sentences. So it really expanded my vocabulary and showed me how much more and how much more words I can use and how I can put them all together.
Good. And how do you feel about your writing now?
I'm pretty I'm pretty confident in it now. See, I didn't know I could write a paper this big. Before I would have probably been like, what? It had to be 4 pages? What? And now I'm like, wow, I can do it now. So I think my writing changed and I'm way more confident in what I write.
Awesome. Thank you, Dorian.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and we have another student testimony, and this was another one of my students. She has graduated. She's a current freshman at Vanderbilt University. Her name is Ashley Meeky, and she was enrolled in AP English Language and Composition her junior year, and then AP English Lit her senior year. So I did teach Ashley for 2 years. And this is her testimony talking about her experience with writing.
Okay.
All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for speaking with me today about the writing program that we've been doing at Southland for the past few years. So I'd like to start out with just you introducing yourself and where you are currently attending college.
Yeah, my name is Ashley Meeky, and I am a freshman at Vanderbilt University.
And when did you go to Southland?
I attended Southland from 2016 until 2020.
Thanks. And so can you please describe your analytical writing journey from the beginning of your junior year to the end of your senior year, since those were the years that you were in AP English?
Yeah, at the beginning of my junior year, I didn't really have much experience with writing of any kind. I mean, I wrote a few creative writing pieces here and there. And I wish I did have more experience from my elementary school into like middle school levels of education. But I still was able to adjust well to the AP curriculum because we had so much support. We had a great foundation. We had so many strategies that we were introduced to. We had a lot of guidance with our writing, a lot of feedback from both our peers and our instructors. So it was just a really well-guided experience, and that really helped me, especially in my junior year level, adjusting to that. And also in our junior year, we did more creative writing pieces, which I felt more comfortable with writing. And then in my senior year, we did more analytical, technical styles of writing. But with that, we also had more support and examples and things like that to help us adjust.
Thank you. And so how did you see your writing change over the course of taking 2 AP English courses? So kind of where did you see yourself at the beginning, and then where did you see yourself at the end? And if you want to talk about your performance on the AP exams, you can do that as well.
Oh, okay, yeah, definitely. With my junior year at the beginning, I felt like I was very kind of disorganized with my writing. I didn't necessarily have a clear, focused type of writing. But then again, with all of the practice and guidance that we had by the end of my senior year, I feel like my writing was very focused and sophisticated. I used a lot of elevated language and was very focused and organized, and I was able to pan out my writing quicker. So that I just had an easier time writing in general, and it was still very organized and focused. And in my junior year, I think on the AP test, I got a 3, but in my senior year, I got a 4. So that's definitely a growth that I'm proud of. And I was able to transfer over those credits into college. So it definitely helped beyond my high school years.
Excellent. And would you mind talking a little bit about how you went about the revision process, because you were extremely diligent in revising your writing. So would you mind speaking about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I revised my writing probably at least 3 or 4 times before it was actually due. I met with you, Ms. Michaels, several times before my pieces were due. I met with peers. I had my peers read it. I read their readings, and I just took a lot of examples. Oh, and also, Ms. Michaels, you provided a lot of like revision readings that we did in class and different ways to go through our writing and make sure we're getting the point across that we wanted to. So that definitely helped a lot.
Excellent. So what do you think best prepared you for the writing that you're currently doing in college?
My first semester, I took an ancient Greek writing seminar. So I remember we did a couple of more older pieces of writing, pieces of reading that we did, and that definitely helped because we kind of did the same timeline in college, but more specifically, finding the deeper meanings within the readings that we did, and just unraveling all the layers to the readings that we did really helped because that definitely transferred into college. However, I know the rhetorical analysis section that we did is also greatly beneficial because I know not even just me, all the friends that I've spoken to are writing rhetorical analysis pieces. And while their classmates are struggling with that, they have it's an easier time for them, for the people that had Ms. Michaels. And I was able to revise my friends' writings as well because they didn't have you and they didn't have the AP section to learn that from. So I was able to help friends, even though I didn't necessarily have that specific class.
Wow, good for you. And I bet they appreciated your help, didn't they?
Yeah, they definitely did. They got a good grade in the paper.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ashley. I really appreciate your time today, and congratulations on Vanderbilt University, and wish you all the best there.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor. I definitely learned a lot from your class. So anything I can do to give back, I'm there.
Thanks, Ashley.
Okay.
All right. And then, of course.
All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for.
Sorry about that. We don't want to see that again. I mean, Ashley's great and everything, but so, of course, we had successes within the work that we were doing in that 2-year time period, but then we also had some challenges too. So one of the 5 elementary and middle schools did not show ELA growth after 2 years of the writing program. So we added a 3rd year, which was not included in the grants. This was outside of the grant, a 3rd year of strategic instructional coaching. And during that time, I was one of the instructional coaches. So I went into the building a couple times a week and observed teachers, gave them feedback, brainstormed with them on revising lessons. And then I would also meet with the assistant principal, and then we would brainstorm on what types of supports the teachers needed. And then we had quarterly professional development to address those needs. And then we also had a teacher leader in the building. So she's someone who was very successful implementing the 6 traits during the 2-year time span of the grant. So she was also a coach in the building, helping teachers with their writing instruction as well. So the 2 testimonies we have, the first is from the assistant principal, Kim McGuire at Stock Elementary, where we did the strategic coaching. And then the second is Laura Sproat, who was the teacher leader, who did a fabulous job implementing the 6 traits.
Good afternoon. Thank you for participating in this interview and agreeing to talk about your involvement in the Writing Dissemination Grant that we did district-wide. So to get started, could you please introduce yourself and describe your role within the district?
Sure. I am a school administrator. I have been a school administrator for 5 years. As an assistant principal at Stock Elementary School, we did have the opportunity to participate. Before becoming an administrator, I was a reading specialist, and before that, I was a classroom teacher. So reading and writing are close to my heart, so I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Thank you. So how long did it take for you to see tangible results of the writing program at your school?
Well, within the first 2 weeks, we were able to see a unified focus in both the students and the teachers. With the decision to utilize the 6 traits framework, we heard clear, common vocabulary during whole and small group instruction. Teachers and students alike were working towards specific targeted goals. in bite-sized pieces. Within the first month, with supportive materials and the consistent observations and effective collaboration, we were able to note that the positive changes in the process and the procedure were becoming applicable in what the students were able to produce in their writing. Also was a shift in their approach and attitude towards writing, which was evident when assignments were given, how quickly they were done, and the completion rate and the tangible product that was involved. We noticed those things right away.
Thank you. And what were the initial challenges that you faced as an administrator implementing this program?
Initially, there was probably two challenges more with scheduling, trying to adapt where we're going to put this in, where we're going to layer it. And also, there became a change of mindset. So as a teacher, you want them to do, we look at all the pieces together as a whole. We tend to not break that down. So as we're teaching our students to break down the writing process into the different traits and the pieces, we ourselves had to start focus singularly on just the parts and try to not ignore the whole. But so that was a mind shift, and that took a lot of conversations and collaborations, a lot of coaching. I know you were one of our coaches and helped us reflect and kind of observe and give us ideas and thoughts. So I think the mindset shift was big initially, and then the scheduling. But both of those things I think we worked through pretty quickly.
Excellent. And so that kind of goes into my next question. So how did you respond to those challenges? And you mentioned a little bit about the coaching, but.
Right. The coaching was helpful. The collaboration, we worked with, we established fairly early a coach per team in our building that would receive more of the targeted instruction and coaching, but also be available to coach others. So that kind of helped problem solve. So it didn't all land on you, our building coach, or on me, an administrator, but the team all had different people to look for and look at. So we, again, we noted that in the end, when we got to the standardized tests, all the work that we had put in we didn't see a huge growth that first year. We were anticipating growth the second year, though COVID did happen and the second test did not happen for the standardized test. But I think we're still feeling the positive effects of the mindset change and shift with our kids and with our teachers. And we're still putting those structures and pieces in place.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time today.
Anytime.
And our second testimony is from Laura Sproat, who was one of the teacher leaders at Sauk Elementary.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today to talk about the 6 Traits writing program that we implemented within your district a few years ago. If you wouldn't mind, could you please just introduce yourself and your role within the district?
Sure. My name is Laura Sproat. I teach 6th grade at Sauk Elementary School.
Thank you. So can you please describe how your students' writing changed as a result of utilizing the 6 traits to focus instruction?
The most pronounced improvements that I noticed when implementing and utilizing the 6 traits were with regards to word choice and organization. The students were able to support their inferences with relevant information from the text, as well as analyze from beyond that. I apologize. Analyze their ideas and inferences and do it in an articulated, structured format. So instead, usually students would have their ideas all over the place, but the organization truly improved when they were taught through using the 6 traits. Word choice as well. The students had a lot of fun with that. They like to try to find words that they could go look in the thesaurus, or they could go look online and try to find a more vivid, what we call purple word. So I would say those 2 traits really stuck out at the 6th grade level as being big improvement after utilization of 6 traits.
Great, thank you. So what went well when you were teaching with the 6 traits?
What I find to be to have been most successful is teaching them segmented. So teaching each trait individually. Ideally, this would be done at maybe an earlier level, but where we had it, we're introducing them all within that year, and it worked out nice. Once they learned organization or once they learned ideas, they could then carry that over because they're able to build on the scaffolding the skills and building one into the other, where they're feeling like they've mastered it a bit, and then they're more confident to utilize it then when they get taught the next trait, rather than trying to teach them everything at one time to a novice writer. That can be overwhelming. So being able to grade and to use rubrics based on one trait at a time, let them build their confidence along with their mastery.
Awesome. Thank you. So then what were the challenges?
The challenges that I find is the biggest one is teaching voice. It's very hard to teach a young writer what you even mean by having your personality shine through in your writing, especially when you're trying to teach maybe an expository writing or even the narratives. They struggle with having their own unique way of presenting. So I definitely had a challenge with teaching voice as well as sentence fluency, as they like to keep them very short, very basic sentences. They may include great vivid words. They may include some figurative language, but struggling with adding complex sentences or compound sentences. They're very basic with their sentence structure. So those were the two traits that I hoped to continue to improve on.
Great, thank you. And what benefits can you identify from aligning writing instruction from the elementary all the way to the high school level?
You're not having to completely recreate the wheel, and the student's not having to completely relearn the way you recreated the wheel. You can build on what the teacher prior, even if it's just the basic structures. The students aren't learning, okay, well, this teacher wants me to call it yes, ma'am. This teacher wants me to call it peace. This teacher wants me to call it any other race, any other number of acronyms. And it gets hard, it gets confusing. So if you're following the same format, each year the student again takes that, okay, well, I've done this now, I know how to do this. And instead of teaching over and going back and having to teach them a whole new format, you're actually being able to build and go further on the skills. So you're able to kind of just pick where you left off, maybe do a review, and then, okay, well, let's work on voice. You guys have mastered everything else. When students aren't doing the same thing every year, it's a lot of reverting back and then having to reteach and reverting back and having to reteach.
Great, thank you. Well, I appreciate your time today, and have a great rest of your day.
Okay, so we're almost getting to an activity. I know you're so excited because now you get to be active instead of a passive learner. So obviously things have changed over the past couple years, and we are no longer in person, and we are doing most things from a virtual setting, and that changes writing instruction, absolutely. So what this might look like in a virtual setting, it still would look like brief, direct instruction. I think there are still timed chunks for students to demonstrate understanding and quick checks, but those quick checks might look a little bit differently, which I'll show you some of the things that I do in this next video clip. And then an opportunity for individualized instruction. And again, that looks different in a virtual setting. So like one thing I do is I always have an extra breakout group meeting so that I can meet with students individually, and then they can actually share their screen and I can enlarge it and I can see their writing on the spot and give them actual face-to-face feedback. Or sometimes that individualized instruction might look like me jumping into one of their electronic documents and then leaving comments in there in real time. So there are a number of ways that we can still do that. It just looks a little bit differently with the virtual instruction. And then of course, timely feedback. But again, I think that timely feedback kind of just comes naturally when you have those opportunities for individual instruction. So I'm going to show you the video clip, but actually I think I just want to preview the questions for the breakout group activity before we start. So I am going to be asking you, how do you teach writing, and then how this lesson might be adapted to your students' needs. So in the packet of materials that you received, there should have been a note sheet for you. So I highly encourage you to take notes during the teaching video clip and then also during your breakout group session. And then we'll be coming back to discuss. So we will, oh, and then there's a Google slide deck template too. So that should have also been in your materials. And this is just, it's the full template of what I used during this video clip. And that is there, it is available for you to modify, do whatever you would like with it if it will serve your needs.
Okay, so today we are going to be writing about symbolism, and we're going to be writing about the symbolism of Mama's plant in Raisin in the Sun.
And so this is a lesson that I taught to my 9th grade English class. And Raisin in the Sun, I know, is a text that's on many high school reading lists, even some middle school reading lists.
All right, so we have used this format before. So claim, evidence, reasoning. We'll do another evidence, reasoning, and then a closing. So first, so in your slide deck, I would like you to please define the term claim.
And so the slide deck template that you received, the students also received. And so that's what they used during this lesson. And the nice thing about the slide deck template is that, you know, it's already chunked for students. It also, once they get into the document, it's great because then I can jump into their document very easily and I can give them feedback in real time about what's happening. So you'll see me throughout. I will, for my quick checks, I will either ask them to copy and paste into the Google chat, or sometimes I will jump directly into their Google slide deck. But this is the slide deck that they recorded all of their notes in, which they eventually used to write the written response.
What is a claim? Please type that in your Google slide now. So I'll give you a couple minutes to type that in the text box in your Google slide. What is a claim in your own words? What does it mean if I am asking you for a claim? Paste what you defined claim as. Please copy and paste your answer into the Google chat, and I will tell you when to hit send. I want to see that we are all on the same page. Okay, good. Yeah, it's the point you're trying to make. Yeah, it's the main point of your piece of writing. It's oftentimes it can be the answer to the prompt. Okay, good. All right, and then define evidence. I'm going to add this layer to it. What is the purpose of using evidence? Very, very good. Okay, and so this is what we're going to be doing, but we're going to be looking at the symbolism of Mama's plant from Raisin in the Sun. So just like with our research papers, I'm always going to ask you to think about things, right? And start to map it out, plan it out before you begin to write.
So yes, as I just stated, I always give them pre-writing questions before they begin. So what I'm going to do here is use these pre-writing questions with a common symbol, the American flag, to show them what I'm going to be then asking them to do with the text excerpt.
So we want to start thinking about some things. So when we're thinking about whatever symbolism we're looking at, we want to start thinking about, well, what does this symbol represent? Because remember, a symbol represents something else. For example, what does the American flag symbolize? So I'll give everyone a minute to type something in the chat. I'll tell you when to hit send. What does the American flag symbolize? All right, please send your responses. The 50 states. What about the 50 states? So can we go a little bit deeper? And especially like when we celebrate the 4th of July, people like to show the flag. Because what are we celebrating? Independence, right? The independence of the 50 states. Very good. Okay, so then we start to think about, well, what are the characteristics of the symbol? So like, what is the symbol like? What are the characteristics of the symbol? So like with the American flag, when you think about the details, what are the characteristics of the American flag? Okay, good. Yeah, we're looking at the stripes. We're looking at the stars. Good, Jemiah. Thank you. Yeah, the stripes. Yes, very good. Representing the states and the colonies, right? And all of those details relate to the American flag as a whole, symbolizing freedom, right? Because it's independence. Independence. Okay, good. So we're going to do the same sort of thing with Mama's plant, right? We're going to think about the details. We're going to think about what the symbol represents and then how those details relate to what the symbol represents. But then we'll add on another layer. We're going to then think about, well, what does this reveal about the text? Okay, good. All right, so here is our text.
So this, I actually took a screenshot of just, the chunk that I wanted students to analyze for this particular lesson, and then put that screenshot directly into the slide deck that they had so that they would easily have access to go back and forth and look at it when they answer the questions. Then those same pre-writing questions that I asked, those appear later on a slide.
So Mama's plant appears in this excerpt from Raisin in the Sun. All right. So Mama says, no, there's something come down between me and them that don't let us understand each other, and I don't know what it is. One done almost lost his mind thinking about money all the time, and the other done commenced to talk about things I can't seem to understand in no form or fashion. What is it that's changing, Ruth? And Ruth says soothingly, older than her years, now, you taking it all too seriously. You just got strong-willed children, and it takes a strong woman like you to keep them in hand. Mama, now looking at her plant and sprinkling a little water on it, they spirited all right, my children. Got to admit they got spirit, Benny and Walter. Like this little old plant that ain't never had enough sunshine or nothing. And look at it. She has her back to Ruth, who has had to stop ironing and lean against something and put the back of her hand on her forehead. Ruth, trying to keep Mama from noticing. You sure loves that little old thing, don't you? Mama says, well, I always wanted me a garden like I used to see sometimes at the back of the houses down home. This plant is close as I ever got to having one. She looks out of the window as she replaces the plant. Lord, ain't nothing as dreary as the view from this window on a dreary day, is there? Why ain't you singing this morning, Ruth? Sing that No Ways Tired. That song always lifts me up so. But we want to focus in on the plant here. And in this particular excerpt, the dialogue of the characters is going to give you a clue as to what the plant symbolizes. So let's go to the next slide. So obviously, if you need to, go back and you can look at that excerpt, but I want you to look closely at the dialogue and what does the plant represent? So you're going to type that into your Google slide. I'll give you a few minutes. And then what evidence in the text leads you to that conclusion? And there is actually text evidence that you can pull out, which indicates what the plant represents. So we want what the plant represents and then the evidence that supports it. Okay, and I'm looking in your responses right now. You actually don't have to put anything into the chat. I'm looking through your responses and I see some answers here. So we have, let's see here. We have the plant represents the garden she never had. And the top is she always wanted a garden like she had seen, and that the plant was the closest thing that she got to it. Yes. And so thank you, Dorian, for that response. Okay, and Cameron also says they represent her dream and the way she cares for her family and the garden. So yes, it is definitely both. Yes. Very good. And the text evidence for that, right? She even says that her children are spirited, just like this little old plant that never had enough sunshine or anything. Very good.
Right. So, in case you're wondering, this is what one of the students produced after that lesson. And this is also included in the Google slide deck template that was included in your material packets. So I'm not going to read through it, but it's highlighted in the same way that I was teaching them in the Google slide deck. So the red is the claim, the yellow is the text evidence, the green is the reasoning, yellow text evidence, green reasoning, purple closing. All right, it's activity time. So I highly encourage you to use the note sheet that was provided in your packet. It also has these questions printed out there for you. You're going to choose a group representative from your breakout group to verbally share what your group discusses with everyone in the main Zoom meeting. So we'll be in a 5-minute breakout and then we'll come back for a whole group share. And the first question that you're discussing is, how do you teach writing? And then the second question is, how might this lesson be adapted to meet your students' needs? Sarah, are we ready for breakout groups?
We are ready, but what happened today is that there is only one participant who actually signed on, and we've been trying to reach her. Her name is Alicia Wiley, and I'm not even sure she is with us because she's not responding. So let's just keep this going, and we'll give you some ideas, presenters, because this is going to be on the ISB website. What do you, as a teacher and as a presenter, expect to hear and learn as a result of this first breakout activity? Let's just discuss that as a group, all of us, and that will help us also understand how you proceed with the demonstration.
Sure. Sherry, do you want to answer that question?
I teach seniors, so by the time they get to me, and she also teaches seniors as well. So how we chunk it for freshmen versus how our seniors come to us looks very different. But we start the beginning of the year really kind of trying to bring out that voice that we talked about was the biggest struggle of the 6 traits. And particularly because our first unit involves the college essays. So voice is really important, that first unit that we teach. So I take a very sensory kind of approach to kind of that first writing assignment that I give to them to kind of gauge where they're at. And we actually go through a whole kind of experience and activity where they'll have brownies or fruit snacks, and we go through this whole sensory detail activity. And then I'll collect, I'll see where they're at, and then we take it from there. But my approach to writing is very different from the freshman teacher's approach because they've gone through our whole program. And really my goal senior year is twofold. We make sure that we do a soup to nuts research paper, and we go through no less than 5 drafts of that research paper. And actually, they just turned it in last week. And the other one is this developing their own distinct voice in their writing.
So
yes.
what I hear you say, Sherry, is that by the time they reach their senior year, it's like a culmination of years of training in the 6 traits methodology. And I'm inferring here, and you can correct me, that voice is something that probably gets more refined or a sharper focus by the time they're seniors, because I'm guessing it's probably one of the hardest also for students to give expression to. But let's just look at the downward adaptation of this, because the second question that Megan has is, how might this lesson be adapted to meet your students' needs? What if somebody in middle school was trying to grapple with this first activity? What might somebody in middle school, like Laura Sproats's class, or even a 9th grader who comes in without any background experience in the 6 traits, deal with this?
Yeah, and I think, I'm talking about the template, and so we have 2 templates inserted in the materials, right? Like one is a more basic template, and then the one is more sophisticated. So obviously there's scaffolding right there, right? So you could even take the base template and you could break that down further depending on where your students are at. You might have to create that in an organizer just about writing a claim. And that might be a week. You might have to pre-teach a whole week about symbolism before you can get to this writing part, right? So I think that's the versatility, right? So like we're just looking at breaking things down. Really what we're doing is strategy instruction. That's what we're doing. And so I think you can break it down as small as you need to, or you can add to it and make it as sophisticated as you want. So, but it's all about breaking things down into manageable chunks for the students. And even, the traits are broken down. So even the traits themselves are areas of focus.
Okay, I have a question. Is there a pacing guide for this at all? Like, do you have some sort of an understanding in the background as to what part of this entire sequence, which is all sequential, should be covered by, middle school, first year, first semester, second semester? Is there a pacing guide at all that would guide you as to the pace or the rapidity with which, how much flexibility you have? Yeah,
it really depends. It really depends upon, the group and the school curriculum, and, and one of the traits tracking is the individual component. So you might spend a week on one of the traits and then move on, but you might have a student or a couple of students who are still struggling with that specific trait, but you're tracking the traits. And so then you need to reteach and circle back to those individual students who have not quite gotten over to the next trait. So part of the traveling portfolio and the trait tracking concept is that, at parent conferences, we've been tracking the individual students' traits. We can pull the rubric out. The parents are familiar with the 6 traits, and they can talk specifically to each individual trait and where their child is at. So it just depends. It depends upon the school, the individual class, and the individual students.
So do Tanya or Christina have any questions pertaining to this first activity at all? If you don't, we'll move on.
Okay. And for our second activity, so again, right, so the first activity, we're focusing on teaching the actual writing, but now we also need to look at, well, how are we going to assess the writing? So that's the purpose of this next activity, is to give practice with assessing a sample student paragraph. So this paragraph is located in the packet materials, and it's written in the same format of the paragraph that you just saw in the last activity: claim, evidence, reasoning, closing. So you would be reading this student sample and then using the 6 traits rubric. So reading the sample, looking at what are the student's strengths, using the 6 traits rubric to score it. So actually giving this student a 1 through 6 in ideas, giving the student a 1 through 6 in organization. And again, so I'm just going to zoom in here for a minute, because the nice thing about the traits is that there really isn't much, it's pretty, it's pretty objective when it comes to the scores, right? So you're looking at this piece and it's like a checklist. Does it do this? Does it do this? Does it do this? If it does, right, if it's a 6, if maybe it only does a couple, then maybe it's more like a 5, right? And then if you go down to the next category, it's like 4 and 3. So if it checks most of these boxes, it's a 4. And so again, this also then provides, built-in feedback for the students, because then you can easily circle either their strengths or their weaknesses within this rubric and then give it back to them. And if you're continuously using this, they become familiar with the verbiage and they understand what this means. They actually begin to internalize what all this means. And like one thing I would do with my students is, after a bit of instruction, maybe after a couple writing assignments with this, then they start using the rubrics to score themselves, right? So then they really internalize the rubrics. And I do this with my AP students too, with the AP rubric, right? Because their rubric is very specific and it's very similar to the 6 traits. And then they use the rubric and they're able to see it, and then they're able to make those changes to their writing.
And I use it with my seniors as well, with the big capstone research project that they have to do, the problem solution paper. And they start with an outline template that has all of the elements of the 6 traits. And they have to, you continuously go back to that outline template to make sure that they've got the parts. And then one of the final things before they turn the paper in is a peer review, where they use the rubric with each other. And like Megan said, they're using the language, they're using the traits, and they become the peer reviewers for each other. So,
and I think the nice thing too is because the traits are broken up into different traits in different categories, students who maybe really struggle with conventions, who normally thought their writing was horrible because they struggled in conventions, now see other parts of their writing that are actually good. And so then they gain some confidence.
Yes.
Because I think, sometimes in the past, writing instruction was so focused on grammar, right? And then students see all these red marks of grammar and they think that means I'm a bad writer, right? When there's so many other elements. And at least what I find with our students is that even the students who struggle with grammar, they usually have good ideas. And if you teach them organization, they'll have good organization too. And then the conventions is just a part that they need to work on. Anyway, so then, the other part of this particular activity was then to, have practice using the rubrics, talk it over with your breakout group. And then, from this rubric, what feedback would you give this student? So of course, yes, the student can see what's circled on the rubric, but then you as the teacher, what do you think the student needs to focus on? Because if there are a lot of points on the rubric for them to look at, that can be a bit overwhelming. So then what feedback would you give this student? And then again, asking the teacher, then based on what you see in this paragraph and assuming that you're seeing the same trend within your entire class, what would you focus on for your next writing lesson? Yes. Sarah, you have a question?
Yes, I do. What do you see in your years of experience with this methodology as the trends in the classes that you have taught at different grade levels? When you begin to use this guide, what are you seeing as, I'm sure it could be all over the map, but given your years of experience, I'm sure you're in a position to sort of reflect on maybe 2/3 of the class when they begin with this methodology are strong in this or continue to struggle with this, something like that.
Right. I think it's different from year to year and class to class, and that's why I try to get that writing sample, at the very beginning of the year, and then I can kind of get a gauge at where we're at, and then we'll focus on very specific parts of the trait. But this year, I would say organization is a struggle this year, and that's why we use that very specific outline template for the paper, and we kept going back to the outline template, and that really helped transitions many times. And bringing out their voice, so those are the three this year, and it changes from year to year. So
yeah, and I would agree. I was seeing the same things this year, and especially in terms of transition, like introducing and integrating text evidence, struggling with that this year. So I see we have another hand up. Christina, you have a question?
Yeah, sure. I do have a question. Now, forgive me if you already covered this, but I'm just curious if you could just clarify. So the 6 traits are, so I'm looking at this rubric, and the 6 traits are like the presentation conventions. Those are the 6 traits?
So
presentation.
That's like the
plus.
That's the plus one.
Yeah, that's part of it. Yeah.
Right. So the rest of the 6 traits. So if you're starting at the top of the attachment,
got it. Okay.
Voice, word choice, sentence fluency, and conventions. Yeah.
Yeah. So each page is a different trait.
Yes.
Got it. Understood. And so when you're scoring this, you're scoring it obviously between a 1 and a 6, right? And so what is your conversion for that? Like, what grade point scale do you grade on at your school?
Sure. So, so we're on a traditional grading scale, right? ABC.
Okay.
So typically, like the way, well, no, let me clarify that first. The 6 traits, they're actually meant as a revision tool more so than a scoring piece. So when we're scoring them for the purpose of revision, of a focus for revision.
Got it.
Does that make sense? I mean, you could convert it to your grading scale for a final letter grade, but they're actually meant as a revision tool.
Right. Got it. Okay. So that makes more sense. Got it.
Good question.
Tanya, do you have any questions based on the 3 big picture questions that should have happened in the second activity?
I have a question, not based on those, but to follow up. So I just find it amazing in the student videos, students talked about revision and how many times they revised and just getting so good at revision. And clearly, if this is a revision sort of based work, but how do you get students to do that? I mean, is that just something that comes with practice also? Because I know that's not something that they often like to do.
Right. It's, it's really tedious and hard work. And I mean, I go into each of the students' papers and leave very specific comments of what needs to happen. And they need to get that, and they do for the most part. You always have your stragglers, but they do for the most part get that, to write well, it's hard work, and that's why we, at the senior level for the senior capstone paper, we have scheduled in 5 drafts. They have to revise 5 times, and I look at very specific things with each draft. They'll add, but then they have to circle back and, tweak their roadmap or their thesis or their, so it's a lot of specific comments on my part. Conferencing, with Zoom individual conferencing, I'll have them working on the paper, and then I create a breakout room and I throw the individual students in, I do a quick conference with them, I throw them back, I pull another one. So really the virtual has lent itself to some nice individual conferencing opportunities, but it's tedious, it's time consuming. It's, for the most part, my students have done the work, so.
I just want to add to that too, because I think that it's so funny. So like this year with my freshmen, that is the only way they wanted to participate. Like they never wanted to unmute themselves. They never wanted to speak in front of anybody. But if I either got into their Google Doc or put them in a breakout group by themselves, they wanted feedback on their writing but they already, I guess somehow were already making, well, I guess this is something you teach too, right? That there's a connection between, here's the feedback I'm going to give you. If you use the feedback and revise, your grade is going to improve, right? So then they actually see the connection. So I think that's part of the motivation. They know that if they make these revisions, their grade is going to reflect that. And then, in this virtual setting, I'm telling you, that is the only way that I could get my freshmen to engage.
And they're actually eager to get the feedback.
They are.
I have to, and it's when there's a draft that has just been turned in, I try to get it back within the week, and they're eager to get it back. They're emailing me. Did you look at my paper yet? Did you look at my paper yet? So they want the feedback, and they want to meet, so it seems to be working, So
Sarah, you have a question? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. You mentioned that part of the assessing of student performance is also peer review, right?
Yes.
So whether you do this in person or virtually, what has been your experience of main observations when you have students assess each other's work?
Could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
What have been your main observations when you have students review each other's work?
Oh yeah, well, I have seniors, so they're very serious about it. They really they step to the plate and they give really great comments and feedback. But I have seniors, so it's a little bit different, but they really take it seriously. And by having them do that, then they really dig into the rubric, the expectations, and they're like finding their own gaps in their paper as well. Oh, like they're looking for it in their peers' paper, and then they realize that that's something that they need to develop as well. But I have seniors, so
I would say at the younger level, the students they need to be very focused. They need a checklist, right? And then you would only focus on one trait for that day, for that peer editing session, because otherwise it's too much and they're all over the place. Or like, kids at the younger grade, actually, it seems like no matter what trait you tell them to focus on, they focus on grammar instead, because it is so ingrained in them that revising means grammar, and revising doesn't necessarily mean grammar. Right. So definitely a checklist, and that's so that if you give them a checklist, I think they're usually pretty successful with that very focused checklist. And then once they get more familiar with the traits, then it becomes more organic for them.
And we have our senior capstone is team taught with the history teacher, the English and the history teacher. We also have the science teacher, and we have it's a whole team approach. And so we will actually have them on that day that we do a peer review in my class, and also with the history teacher as well, with kind of a different focus. So they get 2 peer reviews from their classmates, one in English and one in history. And so it's a good activity right before they turn their paper in.
So you do have this business of interdisciplinary review and writing, for that matter, which is really powerful. Seems to be something you'd want to see culminate, as they go up through the grades. Other questions from anything else, Christina or Tanya? Okay, then ladies, you can move us along.
Okay, and our final activity today. So again, right, we're first looking at instructing students, then assessing students, and now assessing the teacher, assessing the instruction. So this is a brief instructional video clip. It's 4 minutes, and then we're going to talk about the following questions. So again, looking at the traits. So in this lesson, what trait are we focusing on in this lesson? Were students able to apply the concept that the teacher taught them? And then based on the 6 traits rubric, what else would you like to see happen in the classroom with this particular writing skill? And then of course, how might this lesson be adapted to a virtual setting? Because the video clip that you'll see is an in-person is an in-person lesson. But there is technology interwoven into that lesson. So I think you'll definitely be able to see how it can be adapted in a virtual setting. Verbs and then replace them with better verbs. So hopefully the verbs that you chose will, that you'll be able to use them. If not, that's okay because you have a whole list to select from. So this is on Google Classroom. So please open this up. You all have editing rights. Yes. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to read it, and then I want each group to highlight at least one verb or verb phrase that we could replace with something more powerful and more condensed, right? So you might see a phrase of maybe even 4 words that you think, oh, we could probably replace these 4 words with one powerful verb. So bless you. So while I read it aloud, you and your groups, you're going to start highlighting the document with the verb, highlighting the verbs or verb phrases, and then we'll replace. Questions? Okay, here we go. All right, in plainest terms, war cannot be understood by anyone other than the soldiers that have risked their lives in it. The photo shows a couple watching clips taken at a war zone in Vietnam. They both seem to be slightly concerned, however, they have no real experience, which makes it that much harder to completely connect. All they know is what they see and hear through a series of news outlets without actually living the day-to-day horrors. These type of people only know the misconceptions of life at war and negative effects it has on the soldiers. These misconceptions can even play a part on how ordinary civilians see veterans, whether they completely empathize with their struggles or undermine them and salute to their bravery. This may not seem all that bad, however, when one is going internal conflict. It needs to be acknowledged. Those that are indirectly involved or affected are simply on the outside looking in, which is exactly what the picture symbolizes, the disconnect between the two worlds. It is nearly impossible to totally empathize with war veterans without sharing the same experience. Rarely do you run into a civilian far away from the war zone with internal or visible scars as a result of war. The heart-wrenching stories are always told by victims directly involved, those that haven't experienced such traumatic events. As a result, there are no long-term effects that play on their life. Those indirectly involved haven't had a life or death encounter, whereas many veterans were faced with the hard decision of taking the life of others. Okay, so I'm going to give you a minute to skim that again. I'm also going to highlight some verb phrases that I think can be changed, but minimally each group should highlight one verb or verb phrase that needs to be replaced. Questions? Okay, and you can highlight it in whatever color you would like. Okay?
Highlighted in white. Highlighted in black. I don't know what you expect. That's why I said because it says or share y'all probably not gonna be able to say
All right, and then once you selected your verb phrase, I want you to replace it, but as a comment, so that we see it on the side, but we still see the original verb. So when you figure out what you want to replace that verb with, replace the verb with a comment, and then we're going to go through the whole thing, and I'll ask you to explain why you chose to replace it with that verb. And that's all right. How about shows?
Okay,
So, identifying what trait this lesson focused on, whether students were able to apply the concept, and then what you'd like to see happen in the future with this writing skill, and perhaps even in a virtual setting. Those were the discussion points.
How did this demo that you showed, the video was obviously something that took place in your class, Megan. So do you recall the results of that particular exercise? Where were students leading? What were their strengths? What were they struggling with? There was a lot of participation, which is very exciting to see.
Sure. So I think the one that, and this is still, I feel like this is still a trend. I still see it in my class. I saw it in a student paper today where I think sometimes lack the sophisticated vocabulary and they rely on cliches. Mm-hmm. So, and I saw that in that lesson, and I saw them struggle with, well, I don't even know how to replace this. Like, I have no idea, because they don't have the vocabulary to keep things in an academic formal tone. So that's what I saw from that lesson. So then I gave them resources for coming up with words, we did word activities, and then really started to focus. Then a lot of the instruction after that was really focusing in on identifying cliches and finding different words. And then it's funny because I was literally grading papers today, and I read this paper and it was full of cliches, and I'm like, oh my gosh, here it is again. Here it is again. And it's just because they don't know how to keep it academic all the time, right? So academic, again, it's that voice trait. I mean, that goes back to what Laura Sproat was talking about, you've been talking about, it's voice, right? And I think a lot of times they use cliches too because they're trying to spice up their writing, right? Because they think that a spicy voice is like appropriate for all genres of writing. And for a lot of the genres, it needs to be formal. It needs to be academic. Yes. And I always tell them, especially in AP, when they're writing analytical essays, I tell them, don't be cute. You don't need to be cute. You need to be very clear and concise. So do you have another question?
Yeah, so listening to you just explain that in your lived experience, essentially, reminds me that, young people, when they don't have a sufficient lexicon, or they don't have, the well-developed vocabulary, turn to these cliches because it's safe. It's what they have heard, maybe on the media, maybe on the news, maybe, whatever. It's safe. It's generally spoken. It's, hey, everyone talks like this, so I know that I've got to be right most of the time. And they don't have the confidence to say it in their own words, because they're not even sure whether their own words are good enough. Right? I don't know. Yeah. Am I going, is this something that you observe? And how do we build that confidence? Maybe that's my question.
I think the confidence comes with practice, and it comes with not only practice, but then seeing some success, right? So, practicing with different words and then seeing when it works and knowing that, oh, I can do this. Because even Dorian said in his clip, like before this, he'd never written a long paper and he didn't know if he could do it, but now he feels like he can. And so I think it's the same thing with word choice, but I think Laura Sproat was saying that, if we're always going back and we're reteaching the basics, like organization and things like that, because we're not using common language, how do you ever get to voice? That's a pretty sophisticated trait to teach. That's not a basic trait. Like voice and word choice, those really are not basic traits. But if if you haven't aligned things up to that point, you're always reteaching organization and ideas and then the verbiage that we're using. So I think that's it's the alignment plus the practice with that skill
Right.
and that trait.
And, we still have to remind them, even at the senior level. We have to go back and you have to remind and you have to remind, of the formal tone. They're so used to informal language, I'm still, I get the emails because the email will come to me via the Google Classroom, so I'll put a comment in their paper and then when they respond, it comes right to my email. Now, can I use I in? No, you can't use I in your paper. This is a formal research paper, That's, I do have to admit, that's one of the nice things about the virtual. You can have a back and forth convo with your comments and it comes right to me and then I respond immediately back and then they respond. And so, you can have a conversation wherever you're at, immediately, which I have found nice because I was kind of old school.
So you alluded to moving through the traits. So is there a specific order you use or do you loop back to some more often than others, or how does that look generally for you?
What do you do with your freshmen?
Hold on, I don't know why it won't start the video again. But so I would say for teaching freshmen, the first thing is organization. So it's an organization template, right? And then teaching them where to put their ideas. I use this. Oh, I didn't even see that. It is.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening. I don't know why our video isn't working anymore. But anyway, so it's starting with organization for sure. Organization. Oh, there we go. Hi. Organization and ideas, because that's the foundation, right? And then from there you can move into the other aspects, which are really, it's like zooming in, and those are closer details.
Right. And I start with organization as well with the research paper. I mean, we start with the template. So, and we continuously go back to the template, So.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Megan, how many essays do you get through in a year?
How many essays? Like, how many essays do I grade in a year?
No, how many essays do they write in a year?
Oh, do they write? So my freshmen, they write, I think they write like 3 big papers, and then most of it is smaller chunks of writing, because the smaller chunks of writing allow me a closer snapshot, and they allow me and them to zoom in on a skill more. So fewer longer pieces and then more shorter pieces. So even like when they wrote their research paper, right? Like they were editing paragraph by paragraph. Mm-hmm. So that took quite a long time. So that took like, an entire quarter.
Right. Got it.
But then like on the AP level, they write like 8 major papers, all with, the revision process and the peer editing, all of that. So
they like get on a 2 to 3 week cycle.
Yes, like a 2 to 3 week cycle. Yeah. So they move quicker, but we still do the same process. But so yeah, I think it just depends on your students, and I'm a firm believer in quality over quantity.
Right.
What I just said about, paper every 3 weeks.
That's AP.
Yeah.
I think we learned a lot through this group discussion with all of you and this free flow of ideas.
Yeah, definitely.
So it was making us your audience and your teachers who you were teaching actually gave us a better insight into the actual process and struggles that both of you, who are really the experts in this at Southland, have encountered. So I believe we've come to the end of this session, and thank you both, Megan and
Thank
Jerry,
you.
for sharing this information. This information is going to now be posted along with your materials and a bibliography on the ISB website. So I'm going to stop recording now, and we as event staff just debrief for a few seconds.